Tria's vision flickered between consciousness and oblivion as the restraints dug into her wrists. A sharp pain throbbed at the base of her skull, a reminder of the violent takedown that had landed her here. The cold, metallic walls of the human interrogation chamber pressed in around her, humming with barely restrained energy. The air smelled sterile, devoid of the organic scents of her homeworld, Laraki's. It was suffocating. A door hissed open. Boots echoed against the floor. Tria forced her head up, meeting the sharp, assessing gaze of the human stepping into the room. His short, dark hair was slightly tousled, his uniform pristine. He wasn't armored like the soldiers who had dragged her in. No, this one was something else, an interrogator. He sat down across from her, studying her with an expression that was neither cruel nor indifferent, merely curious. "My name is Captain Eric Caldwell," he said, his voice calm, measured. "I assume you understand English." Tria glared at him but gave a sharp nod. "Good." He leaned forward slightly. "You were piloting a stealth-class scout ship in a restricted zone. Your vessel was carrying classified biological cargo. Want to explain what you were doing there?" Tria pressed her lips together. If she said nothing, the humans would assume the worst: bioweapons, espionage, an imminent attack. If she spoke, she risked revealing too much. Eric tilted his head. "You're not a soldier, are you?" Her breath caught for a fraction of a second, but she masked it quickly. Still, he had noticed. His gaze flickered with understanding. "You're a pilot, sure, but you don't have the discipline of a soldier. You're not trained for resistance." He leaned back, fingers tapping against the table. "That means you were on a personal mission, not military." Tria exhaled slowly. "If I tell you the truth, will you listen? Or will you just use it against me?" Eric didn't hesitate. "That depends on the truth." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Tria decided there was no point in silence. She had already been caught. If she didn't act now, her people were doomed. "I was trying to recover a cure," she said, voice low but firm. "A cure for a plague that's wiping out my species." Eric's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. "Go on," he said. So she did. Larakis had been dying for years. The plague, known as the Red Spiral, had spread across the homeworld, targeting Larakian physiology with ruthless precision. Those infected suffered cellular breakdown, their nervous systems collapsing in on themselves. There was no cure, no treatment, only death. And then, a whisper of hope. A decades-old human research station, abandoned at the far reaches of the war-torn sector, had once conducted experiments on interspecies diseases. Deep in the archives, Tria had found records indicating that human scientists had developed an experimental cure for a virus with striking similarities to the Red Spiral. The problem? That station was now lost in a no-man's land of debris fields, scavenger warbands, and automated defense drones left over from the last great war between their species. She had set out alone to retrieve the cure, and she had failed. Eric listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. Then he asked, "Why didn't your people send a proper mission? A team?" Tria's jaw clenched. "Because we're losing the war. Every ship is needed on the front. Every scientist is working on weapons or defenses. No one is allowed to waste resources on something as trivial as a disease." Something dark passed over Eric's face. "I see." He stood and walked toward the door. Tria tensed, expecting him to leave. But instead, he turned back to her. "What if I helped you?" She blinked. "What?" "I can get you to that station," he said simply. "But you have to trust me." Tria narrowed her eyes. "Why would a human help me?" Eric exhaled through his nose. "Because I know what it's like to be abandoned by your own people." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. A long silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Tria nodded, and the unlikely alliance was formed. The mission wouldn't be easy. Eric had access to intelligence, but he wasn't high enough in the chain of command to simply order Tria's release. If they were going to make it to the research station, they would have to break her out, and that meant betraying his own. "You understand what you're doing?" Tria asked as Eric adjusted her cuffs, making them loose enough to slip off. "I do," he said grimly. I just hope it's worth it. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, but she buried it quickly. The escape was set into motion. Eric used his clearance codes to reroute patrols, ensuring they wouldn't cross paths with security teams. He led Tria through the labyrinthine corridors of the human stronghold, past reinforced bulkheads and biometric scanners. The facility was a fortress, designed to hold enemies of war, spies, and prisoners of great importance. If they were caught, there would be no second chance. As they reached the hangar, alarms blared. Someone had discovered the security breach. Tria cursed. "They're onto us." "Move," Eric ordered. Sprinting toward a sleek reconnaissance ship, gunfire erupted behind them. Soldiers poured into the hangar. Tria dove into the pilot's seat, fingers flying across the controls. The engines roared to life just as Eric jumped aboard, slamming the hatch shut. A voice crackled over the comms. "Captain Caldwell, stand down. That's an order." Eric didn't hesitate. "Sorry, Commander. Can't do that." The ship shot forward, weaving through the hangar bay as anti-air defenses activated. Plasma rounds streaked past, illuminating the cockpit in flashes of blue and white. Tria gritted her teeth. "Hold on." The ship blasted through the outer defenses, bursting into the vast emptiness of space. Behind them, the human fleet scrambled to intercept, but they were already gone. Their journey had begun, and there was no turning back. The ship hummed as it cut through the void, its engines burning hard to escape the human fleet's sensor range. Tria's hands flew over the controls, adjusting their trajectory, rerouting power, and pushing the vessel far beyond its recommended limits. Eric sat beside her, watching the scanners. 3 ships on our tail. They'll catch up in less than 10 minutes. Tria didn't answer immediately. Her mind worked through the problem with the precision of a veteran pilot. "We need to lose them in the Murian Rift." Eric's expression darkened. "That's suicide." The Murian Rift was a dead zone, a labyrinth of gravitational distortions, collapsed asteroid fields, and rogue black holes left in the wake of a long-forgotten celestial disaster. No one entered willingly. Tria smirked. "Exactly." She yanked the control stick hard to port. The ship lurched violently, the inertial dampeners struggling to compensate. Eric cursed under his breath as the starfield outside twisted, shifting from the vast openness of space into a chaotic maelstrom of debris and radiation bursts. The pursuing ships hesitated. Only one followed. "Looks like one of them is feeling brave," Eric muttered. Tria's fingers danced over the console. Not for long. The ship weaved through the rift's treacherous paths. Gravity spikes flared on their instruments, warning of impending singularities. Tria maneuvered them through with razor-sharp precision, but their pursuers stayed stubbornly on their trail. Then, an opening. Tria suddenly cut the engines, letting the ship drift. The pursuing vessel shot past them at full speed, right into a gravitational eddy. The human pilot barely had time to react before their ship was yanked sideways, its hull groaning under the stress. For a brief moment, Tria saw the sheer panic on the pilot's face through the viewport. Then, with a violent twist, the ship collapsed inward, crushed into nothingness by the rift's unpredictable forces. Eric exhaled. "Remind me never to chase you in a dogfight." Tria grinned. "Smartest thing you've said all day." With the last pursuer gone, she reactivated the engines, charting a course toward their real destination, the abandoned human research station, where the fate of her people waited. The station loomed in the distance, an eerie silhouette against the backdrop of a dying star. It was massive, far larger than Tria had expected, an entire floating city of rusted steel and broken promises. Eric frowned at the readings. No life signs, no power signatures. It's completely dead. Tria didn't relax. That just means nothing organic is left. As they approached, the ship's exterior lights illuminated the station's hull. Words in faded human script lined the metal. Horizon Research Facility, Sector 09. Beneath it, in hastily scrawled paint, were words in an entirely different language, likely the last desperate message of someone who had died here. "Abandon hope." Eric tightened his grip on his weapon. "Great. That's not ominous at all." Tria guided the ship toward the docking bay, matching its rotation to the station's slow, corpse-like drift. The ship latched onto the docking clamps with a shudder, and the airlock hissed as it cycled open. A gust of stale, artificial air greeted them. The scent of rust, decay, and something faintly chemical hung in the corridors beyond. The station was a tomb. Eric's voice was quiet. "I've got a bad feeling about this." Tria ignored him and stepped inside. The halls were lined with broken machinery and shattered screens, their last recorded data lost to time. The deeper they went, the more evident it became that something had happened here. Something violent. Scorch marks marred the walls. Deep gouges, as if from claws or weapons, tore through doors and bulkheads. Skeletons, human and otherwise, littered the floor. Eric knelt beside one. "This wasn't an evacuation," he said grimly. "They fought to the end." Tria pressed on. "We need to find the medical archives." The deeper they ventured, the more the sense of wrongness grew. The flickering emergency lights cast shifting shadows, making it feel as though unseen figures lurked just beyond their vision. Then, a sound. A faint, scraping noise. Both of them froze. Eric's hand went to his weapon. "Did you hear?" The lights flickered. A shape darted in the periphery of Tria's vision. Something was still here, and it was not human. A guttural, clicking noise echoed down the corridor. Tria's pulse quickened. She raised her weapon, scanning the darkness. "We are not alone." Eric motioned for silence, then pointed toward a nearby access terminal. "If the cure is anywhere, it'll be in the medical wing. We need to move. Now." They pressed forward, keeping their movements swift but quiet. The medical sector loomed ahead, its doors half open, flickering light spilling into the hallway. Beyond, broken containment pods lined the walls, their glass shattered from within. Eric muttered, "Something got out." Tria didn't answer. Her attention was locked on the data terminal. She rushed to it, fingers flying across the controls. The system was sluggish, barely functional, but it still held information. Project: Phoenix Serum. Status: Experimental, abandoned. Primary researcher: Dr. Lillian Carter. Last entry: Error: Corrupted data. A file began to decrypt. Then, behind them, something moved. A low, gurgling breath. Tria spun around. In the dim light, she saw it. A figure, once human, now twisted beyond recognition. Its flesh was stretched and blackened, veins pulsating with an unnatural red glow. Its mouth was too wide, filled with jagged, irregular teeth. It tilted its head at her, as if studying her. Then, it lunged. Tria barely had time to fire before it crashed into them. Eric's gun barked, plasma rounds tearing into the creature's flesh, but it didn't slow. It moved with terrifying speed, claws swiping at them with bone-shattering force. Tria dove aside, rolling to her feet as another shot seared through the air. The thing shrieked, its voice a horrific blend of human and something else. Then, more noises echoed down the corridor. More footsteps, more clicking. And suddenly, Tria understood. This station hadn't been abandoned. It had been quarantined. The cure might still be here, but so were the mistakes of those who had tried to create it. And they were waking up. The station was alive. Not with human activity, but with them. The things that had once been scientists, soldiers, and civilians. Twisted beyond recognition, their bodies pulsed with unnatural life. Their movements jerky and erratic like broken marionettes. Tria's pulse pounded in her ears as she raised her weapon. The creature that had lunged at them was still moving, its wounds knitting together with sickening speed. Its too wide mouth gurgled something, a garbled echo of words that no longer made sense. Eric fired again. 3 rounds, dead center mass. The thing staggered but did not fall. "Tria!" he shouted. She didn't hesitate. Her fingers flew over the terminal, yanking a data drive from the console. It was small, cold in her palm. If the cure was here, it was in this drive. The station shuddered. A scream, inhuman, hungry, reverberated through the halls. It wasn't just the creature before them. Others were coming. Eric grabbed her wrist. "We need to move." The doors to the medical wing burst open. They came in droves, half-decayed forms, glowing veins pulsing beneath stretched flesh. Some moved on all fours, scuttling like insects. Others were impossibly tall, their spines grotesquely elongated, heads lolling at unnatural angles. And they were fast. Tria turned and ran. Their boots pounded against the metal floor as they sprinted through the darkened corridors. Sirens blared, lights flickered, and the station itself seemed to shudder as if waking from a long nightmare. "They're cutting us off," Eric yelled. Tria's eyes darted to the corridor map on her wrist interface. There was only one path left, the maintenance shaft. "This way," she barked. They slid around a corner and reached a heavy bulkhead door. Tria slammed her fist against the panel. Red light. Locked. Eric cursed. He turned, firing another round into the nearest abomination. The thing barely flinched. "They're getting closer," he gritted out. Tria yanked a plasma cutter from her belt and jammed it into the lock. Sparks flew as metal melted. Behind them, clawed hands scraped against the walls. A guttural, almost mocking voice rasped. "Where are you going?" Tria didn't look back. With a final hiss, the door's mechanism gave. She wrenched it open and shoved Eric inside. "Go!" They stumbled into the shaft and slammed the hatch shut behind them. The things outside screeched, their claws raking against the metal. For now, they were safe. But not for long. The shaft stretched ahead in darkness, barely wide enough for them to crouch. The station groaned around them, as if it knew their presence. Eric wiped sweat from his brow. "Tell me we're close to an exit." Tria checked the map. The emergency docking bay should be at the end of this shaft. They moved cautiously, the dim glow of their wrist displays casting eerie shadows. Then, a whisper. It wasn't behind them. It was ahead. Tria froze. A faint, rhythmic tapping echoed from the far end of the tunnel. A voice followed, distorted and fragmented. "Don't leave." Eric's hand tightened around his weapon. "That's not human." Tria's breath came shallow. They were trapped. Then, the metal beneath them trembled. The walls moved. Panic surged. Tria lunged forward, dragging Eric with her. The shaft behind them collapsed inward as some vast, living mass, crawled through the station's structure, hunting them. They had to run. The emergency docking bay was within reach. The doors loomed ahead, their rusted panels partially open. Beyond them, a ship, an old, battered freighter, long abandoned but still intact. "We can make it," Tria gasped. Then, a deafening shriek. The ceiling above split open. A mass of flesh, tendrils, and glowing veins dropped down, blocking their path. A dozen warped faces stretched within the shifting horror, mouths forming silent screams. And at the center the source of the infection, the thing that had consumed this station. It pulsed, watching them, learning. Tria's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a plague. It was something worse. Something that wanted to spread. Eric fired first. Plasma rounds slammed into the writhing horror, burning holes through its flesh. It didn't flinch. Instead, it grew. Tendrils lashed out. One wrapped around Eric's leg, yanking him off his feet. "Eric!" Tria screamed. He struggled, firing wildly, but the tendrils pulled tighter. The flesh shifted, mimicking his voice. "Help me, Tria." Her blood turned to ice. She fired. The plasma blast severed the tendril, releasing Eric. He scrambled to his feet, panting. "No more time," he gasped. "We have to go now." They sprinted toward the freighter. Behind them, the mass convulsed, letting out a sound that was almost laughter. And then, the station began to fall apart. The freighter's doors were already open. Tria launched herself into the pilot's seat, fingers racing over the controls. Eric slammed the hatch shut as the station began to collapse. The engines roared to life. "Tria, move." The freighter lifted just as the infected mass burst through the docking bay walls, tendrils reaching, screaming. Tria gunned the thrusters. The ship tore free from the collapsing station, blasting into open space. Behind them, the Horizon Research Facility imploded, vanishing into the void. Silence. Only their ragged breathing filled the cockpit. Then, Eric turned to her. "The drive, do we have the cure?" Tria opened her palm. The data drive was still there, intact. She exhaled. Yes. A pause. Eric looked out at the stars. Then let's finish this. They had escaped, but the war, their mission, was just beginning. The freighter drifted in the darkness, its engines cooling after their frantic escape. The wreckage of the Horizon Research Facility was now a distant cloud of debris, its horrors consumed by the void. But the sense of danger hadn't left. Tria slumped back in the pilot's chair, still gripping the data drive. The small device felt impossibly heavy in her palm. Eric sat across from her, watching. His face was unreadable, but his fingers were tense against his knee. What's on that drive, exactly? Tria inhaled sharply. If the records were right, this contains the last working formula of Project Phoenix, a cure for the red spiral. The humans developed it years ago, but they abandoned it when the station fell. Eric frowned. Why abandon something so valuable? Tria's eyes darkened. Because something went wrong. She tapped the console, beginning to decrypt the files. The data was fragmented, corrupted, but some logs remained intact. A distorted voice crackled over the speakers, the final audio logs of Dr. Lillian Carter. Log 3245, B. The mutations are progressing beyond expectation. The subjects are no longer human. There's something else. Their minds are gone. We can't contain them. This is no longer a cure. It's... The log cut off abruptly. Eric's jaw clenched. That thing we saw back there, was that one of the test subjects? Tria nodded grimly. Or worse, the original infection was designed to be controlled. If the mutations continued beyond containment, then the cure itself might be just as dangerous as the disease. A long silence stretched between them. Then Eric asked, "Do you still think this can save your people?" Tria's hands tightened around the drive. "We don't have a choice." The ship's sensors suddenly blared. Eric shot to his feet. "We've got incoming." Tria's fingers flew over the controls. The display flared to life. 3 vessels approaching fast. And they weren't random scavengers. They were Lyrakian warships. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "That's my fleet." Eric's expression hardened. "Then why are they locking weapons?" The comms flickered on, and a cold, familiar voice filled the cockpit. "Tria Voss, by order of the Lyrakian High Command, you are to power down your vessel and surrender the data drive immediately." Tria felt her stomach drop. She recognized that voice. Admiral Kalair, her superior, and her executioner, if she let this happen. Eric glanced at her. This was supposed to be a rescue mission. Tria's hands trembled on the controls. "I don't think they ever intended to let me come back." The Admiral's voice was sharp. "Tria, your actions have violated direct wartime orders. You are carrying classified human technology. This is treason. Power down your vessel and prepare for docking." Tria's thoughts raced. She had spent years fighting for her people, risking everything. And now, when she had finally secured their salvation, they were willing to kill her for it. Eric's hand hovered over the weapons controls. "We can't outrun them." Tria's mind snapped into focus. "No, but I can buy us time." She opened the comms. "Admiral, if you fire on us, you'll destroy the only cure for the red spiral. You'd be condemning millions of Lyrakians to death." A pause. Then the Admiral's voice returned, colder than before. "Your concern for our people is noted, but the High Command has already chosen a different path." Tria's breath caught. "What?" "We have engineered a genetic solution. The infected will be eliminated. The disease will die with them." The realization hit her like a knife to the gut. Her people weren't looking for a cure. They were preparing for a purge. Tria turned to Eric, her pulse hammering. "We can't let them take this drive." Eric's gaze was steely. "Then we fight." Tria's fingers tightened over the controls. "No, we run." She flipped the thrusters to full, sending the freighter into a violent spin. The Lyrakian warships fired, plasma bolts streaking past as the ship veered into a debris field. Eric braced himself. "They won't let us go." Tria's voice was quiet, resolute. "I know." She pulled up the navigation charts. There was only one place left to hide. The human colony of EOS 9. Eric saw it too. His face darkened. "The humans will shoot us down the second we enter their airspace." Tria met his gaze. Not if we tell them we have something they want. The ship roared forward, leaving the warships behind. The fleet wouldn't pursue into human-controlled space, not without igniting an all-out war. They had a slim chance, but it was better than none. Eric exhaled. Let's hope they're willing to listen. Tria's fingers curled around the data drive. If they weren't, then the last hope for her people would die in the void. The freighter streaked toward EOS 9, its hull shaking under the strain of maxed-out thrusters. Behind them, the Lyrakian warships hesitated at the edge of human-controlled space, unwilling to cross the boundary outright. But Tria knew they wouldn't wait forever. Eric was already at the communications terminal, fingers working the encrypted human military channels. This is Captain Eric Caldwell of the United Earth Intelligence Division, requesting immediate clearance for emergency docking. Repeat, emergency clearance is required. The response was swift. Unknown freighter, you are violating restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately. Eric shot Tria a look before responding. We have high-value intel concerning classified research from Horizon Facility. He hesitated for half a second before adding, and an urgent medical breakthrough. Silence. Then, the voice returned, sharper now. Maintain course and prepare for escort. If you deviate, we will open fire. Tria exhaled slowly. They're taking the bait. Eric grimaced. Or setting a trap. Either way, there was no turning back. EOS 9 loomed ahead, a vast orbital fortress encased in layers of titanium and reinforced energy shields. It wasn't just a colony, it was a strategic command hub, built in the early years of the war to serve as humanity's outermost line of defense. It was also the last place Tria wanted to be. As the freighter neared, two heavily armed escort ships flanked them, guiding them toward the docking bay. The moment the ship landed, alarms blared and security teams swarmed the airlock. Tria clenched her fists as armored soldiers surrounded them, weapons raised. A man in an officer's uniform stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, his face weathered with experience. His cold gray eyes locked onto Eric first. Caldwell, he said. His tone was unreadable. Eric stiffened. Commander Briggs. Tria glanced between them. They know each other. Briggs shifted his attention to her. His expression barely changed, but Tria caught the flicker of disgust. And this must be the Lyrakian spy. Eric stepped in. She's not a spy. She's the reason we're here. Briggs didn't look convinced. Explain. Eric reached into his vest and pulled out the data drive. The cure for the red spiral is on this, he said. We pulled it from Horizon Facility before it collapsed. Briggs didn't react immediately. Then he extended a hand. Hand it over. Tria's gut twisted. No. The air shifted in an instant. The soldiers tensed. Eric turned to her sharply. Tria. She ignored him, locking eyes with Briggs. This cure could save millions. But I'm not just giving it to you so Earth can hoard it. If we do this, we do it together. Briggs regarded her for a long moment. Then, he smirked. I was wondering when the real reason you came here would show itself. The conference room was suffocating. Tria sat across from Briggs and his advisors, with Eric beside her. A massive display screen showed the decrypted data from the drive, Project Phoenix in all its grim detail. The room was silent as the final research log played. Dr. Lillian Carter's last words. The mutation isn't stable. Every subject exposed to the serum experiences rapid regeneration, but the neural degradation is irreversible. They don't die from the disease, but they cease to be human. We have contained the breach for now, but we cannot allow this to leave the station. If you are hearing this, burn everything. The log ended. No one spoke. Briggs leaned back in his chair, studying Tria. So, you're telling me this cure is really a biological time bomb? Tria's fists clenched. It's imperfect, but it can be fixed. Briggs exhaled, fingers steepling. You expect us to just hand over classified technology to a Lyrakian? Tria met his gaze without flinching. I expect you to do the right thing. Briggs smirked. You clearly don't know how wars work. Eric leaned forward. Briggs, listen to me. If we don't act, the Lyrakian High Command is going to purge their infected population. That's millions of deaths. Briggs studied him. And what exactly are you proposing? Eric's voice was steady. We work together. Human scientists, Lyrakian scientists. We refine the cure, make it safe, and we distribute it to both sides. Briggs chuckled, shaking his head. You want me to cooperate with an enemy government? Tria's patience snapped. Your people created this virus, she said coldly. You unleashed it on a research station, then abandoned it when it became inconvenient. Now it's spreading through my world, and your only concern is whether you gain a political advantage. Briggs's smirk faded. Silence. Then, he leaned forward. I'll make you a deal, he said. Tria tensed. I'm listening. Briggs's eyes gleamed. We'll develop the cure, but it stays under human control. Tria's stomach twisted. No. Briggs shrugged. Then our conversation is over. Eric looked between them, tension thick in the air. Tria knew what was happening. Briggs wanted to weaponize the cure. Control it. Leverage it. She had come too far for this. She glanced at Eric. His expression was tight, conflicted. She needed to act now. Tria's mind raced. If Briggs controlled the cure, the Lyrakians would never see it. Her people would die. Or worse, become the monsters from Horizon. She couldn't let that happen. Her fingers twitched toward her wrist console. She still had one card left to play. A security override. One command, and she could upload the data to every major network, human and Lyrakian alike. No one could hoard it. No one could weaponize it. But if she did this, she would be making enemies of both sides. Her heart pounded. Eric was watching her now, realization dawning in his eyes. Tria, what are you? She pressed the button. The room's hollow screens flickered. The data burst outward, transmitting across secure and unsecured channels alike. Within seconds, the full research logs, formulas, and classified findings of Project Phoenix spread across the stars. Briggs shot to his feet. What the hell did you just do? Tria stood. I gave the cure to everyone. Briggs's face darkened with rage. You just made yourself the most wanted person in the galaxy. Tria exhaled. Then I guess we're back to being enemies. Eric rose beside her. His voice was quiet, but resolute. I hope not. Alarms blared. Security was coming. Tria glanced at Eric. You coming? A slow smirk spread across his face. You just pissed off two governments at once. Of course I'm coming. The doors burst open, and the chase began. The alarms were deafening. Red warning lights flashed across the station as automated lockdown protocols kicked in. Security officers stormed the conference room, weapons raised, their eyes cold and unyielding. Tria and Eric were already moving. Eric ripped the chair from the floor and hurled it at the nearest guard. The soldiers staggered back, buying them a split-second opening. Tria darted forward, flipping the nearest table to create cover as plasma rounds sizzled through the air. Move! Eric barked. They dashed for the corridor. The soldiers recovered fast, their boots hammering against the metal as they gave chase. A voice blared over the station's intercom. All units, we have a breach. The Lyrakian prisoner and Captain Caldwell are to be detained by any means necessary. Briggs. Tria gritted her teeth. Damn him. Eric glanced at her as they ran. Any bright ideas? Tria's eyes flicked to a nearby terminal. An escape route. The cargo trams, she said. They lead to the outer docks. Eric nodded. Then we run like hell. And they did. The station's cargo trams were massive, industrial haulers meant to transport supplies across EOS 9's sprawling infrastructure. Right now, they were Tria and Eric's only chance. The tram hissed to life as Tria slammed the control panel. The platform shuddered beneath them as the automated system engaged. The tram shot forward, speeding along the elevated rails that cut through the station's interior. Behind them, security forces in pursuit. Tria ducked as plasma fire ripped past her head, scorching the tram's exterior. Eric returned fire, his shots precise and calculated. This is a terrible plan, he shouted over the wind and alarms. Tria smirked. It's working, isn't it? Then boom. An explosion rocked the tram. The security forces had fired a tracking missile, striking the rail just ahead. The track buckled. Tria's stomach lurched. We're gonna crash, Eric yelled. The tram hit the broken section and launched into the air. For a single, breathless moment, they were weightless. Then, Impact. The tram slammed into a secondary docking platform, skidding across the metal in a shower of sparks. Tria's body jerked violently, but she managed to roll with the impact. Eric wasn't as lucky. He hit the deck hard, groaning as he pushed himself up. That was the worst ride of my life. Tria grabbed his arm, hauling him to his feet. Come on. They were in the secondary docking bay, surrounded by abandoned ships and cargo freighters. The docking doors loomed ahead. But, shit, Eric muttered. Security teams were already there. They had anticipated this. A dozen soldiers, weapons raised. And at the center of them, Commander Briggs. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. It's over, he said. Drop your weapons. Tria glanced at Eric. He exhaled sharply, then muttered. You got one last miracle in you? Tria's fingers hovered over her belt. Then, she smirked. Always. She threw a flash grenade. The explosion of light and sound disoriented the soldiers. Tria and Eric bolted. They weaved between crates, ducking under falling debris as confused gunfire erupted around them. The security forces recovered too fast, but by then, Tria had already spotted their ticket out. A military-class interceptor. Fast. Sleek. Armed to the teeth. Eric saw it too. You're insane. Tria grinned. You're just figuring that out now? They sprinted toward the ship. Briggs recovered first. He saw what they were doing, and his voice boomed through the docking bay. Stop them. Too late. Tria slammed into the cockpit, fingers flying over the controls. The ship roared to life. Eric barely made it inside before Tria hit the thrusters. The ship blasted out of the docking bay, a surge of fire and energy sending shockwaves through the hangar. They were free. For now. EOS 9 shrank behind them. But the danger was far from over. Tria pushed the engines to maximum, but warning lights were already flashing. The ship was fast, but so were the human warships scrambling to intercept them. Eric scanned the sensors. They're launching pursuit fighters. Tria's grip tightened. Of course they are. The comms crackled to life. Unknown vessel, power down and prepare for immediate capture. Tria killed the comms. Then, something unexpected. Her ship's long-range sensors pinged. Eric frowned. What the hell is that? Tria checked the readings, then went deadly still. The signal wasn't human. It was Lyrakian, and it was coming straight for them. Eric's voice was tight. Your people found us. Tria's hands clenched the controls. No, this is worse. She recognized the ship's signature. It wasn't just Lyrakian forces. It was Admiral Kalayer's personal warship. A second comm signal came through, this time, on Lyrakian military frequencies. Tria hesitated, then accepted it. Kalayer's voice filled the cockpit. Tria Voss, you are to surrender immediately. The High Command will not tolerate your treason. Tria swallowed hard. Admiral, listen to me. I have the cure. I transmitted the data. The war is over. We can save our people. A long silence. Then, Kalayer's voice darkened. You misunderstand. We never wanted a cure. Tria's blood ran cold. Eric whispered, they're here to kill you. The human warships were closing in. The Lyrakian warship was inbound, and they were caught in the middle. Tria's mind raced. 2 fleets. Nowhere left to run. Eric's voice was quiet. Tell me you have a plan. Tria took a deep breath. Then she smiled. I'm about to make both sides very, very angry. Eric groaned. That's not a plan. Tria's hands moved over the controls. She opened all comm channels, human and Lyrakian alike. And then, she broadcast her voice to the entire sector. To everyone listening, the war is a lie. Tria's voice rang out across every open channel, human, Lyrakian, civilian, and military alike. The war is a lie. Her words carried through the void, crackling into the cockpits of fighter pilots, into command rooms of battleships, into colonies and strongholds across the sector. She pressed on, her voice steady despite the chaos unraveling around her. The humans created the red spiral. They abandoned the cure. The Lyrakian High Command refuses to save their own people. They would rather purge the infected than find a solution. I have the cure, and I am not giving it to either of them. Her words had an effect. On the human side, Confusion rippled through their formation. Briggs's forces hesitated, unsure whether to keep firing or stand down. On the Lyrakian side, the warship held its position. Even Admiral Kalair, ever the loyal enforcer, didn't respond immediately. Then, Briggs's voice roared over the comms. "Shoot her down." At the same moment, Kalair issued his own command. "Destroy the traitor." The warships opened fire. Tria threw the ship into a dive. Laser fire rained down from both sides, streaking across the void in arcs of lethal energy. The interceptor's shields flared violently under the barrage. Eric gritted his teeth as he gripped the co-pilot controls. "You really know how to piss off an entire galaxy." Tria smirked. "It's a gift." The human fleet and the Lyrakian warship weren't just targeting her. They were firing at each other now, chaos erupting in full. She had ignited something far bigger than herself. For the first time, the humans and Lyrakians weren't just fighting each other blindly. They were questioning, and that was the first step toward the war falling apart. But Tria wouldn't be around to see it, not unless she survived. Eric's voice was sharp. "We need an exit. Now." Tria's eyes flicked to the star charts. One option: a blind jump into uncharted space. Risky, dangerous, possibly suicidal. She punched the coordinates. "Hold on." The ship's engines roared. A final volley of missiles streaked toward them. And then, in a burst of light, they were gone. The jump drive spat them out into the unknown. A dead sector. No planets. No stations. Just the silent vastness of space. The ship drifted, damaged but intact. Systems flickered, struggling to recover from the jump. Eric leaned back, exhaling shakily. "That was the worst idea you've ever had." Tria chuckled. "It worked, didn't it?" A long silence stretched between them. The weight of what they had done settled in. Tria was a traitor to her people. Eric was a fugitive from his own. And the cure, the thing they had fought so hard for, was out in the universe now, free for anyone to use. Eric rubbed his temples. "So, what now?" Tria stared out at the stars, a slow smile forming. "Now," she said, "we find out what happens when the truth can't be buried anymore." She reached for the controls, setting a course for the next unknown. The galaxy had changed forever, and Triavos was no longer running. She was just getting started.